Well, I am so glad I found you. I was out here on my own, couldn't find a single place where I could feel at home. I was just amazed to see that you'd been here for so long. I'm grateful that you persevered. I wrote you all this song. I was thinking mango thoughts in a meatloaf town. The food for thought was all the same. It really brought me down. Nothing on the heavenly buffet line was satisfying my appetite for truth and right. I'm sitting here just sighing. Everybody else seemed fine with blue jello, green peas, banana pudding, nothing spicy, no blitzes, no Vietnamese. I was craving jalapeno talk just to soothe my soul, saying unsurprising things, taking all my self-control. I am glad the talk is straight here, though a lot of the people are not. We got patriots and protesters, and that ain't all. We got atheists and redneck Hindus. We got pagan Buddhist Jews. Some of us like the Christian songs, some just believe the blues. Mango thoughts in this meatloaf town. Now my soul is on a roll. I got you folks all around. We got us a feast for the spirit and a feast for the mind. You speak the truth, walk in love. We remember to be kind. Well, that's what the ending would be if I were a sweet and earnest person. And Lord knows I do try. But here's the real ending. We got us a feast for the spirit and a feast for the mind. But in case of rapture, pack a snack, 'cause we'll be left behind.
This is Micah Royal, the Progressive Redneck Preacher, with our special interview series for the Progressive Redneck Preacher blog, focused on what I call country fried Christians and kudzu Christians. The country fried Christian and kudzu Christian interviews feature progressive voices who are working in the South to make our world and our communities places that the oppression, prejudice, abuse, violence, and small-mindedness of the remnants of slaveholder Christianity that linger in the South, where they are laid aside and the values of hospitality, graciousness, celebrating diversity, and standing for justice are upheld. The women and men I will feature through these interviews are working to transform the South into a place of healing, freedom, and equality for all. Country fried Christians are individuals who, like me, are children of the South. We grew up born by Southern mamas, swimming and fishing in its rivers, walking its hills, and hearing good old-fashioned Southern drawl. Sweet tea runs through our veins, and you can still see the shimmer of fried chicken grease sticking to our fingers. But like me, these fellow country fried Christians have seen the damage that the legacy of slaveholder Christianity has to our approach to the stranger, to the other, and to violence that has become too ingrained in our Southern culture. These country fried Christians are working to transform our culture, to live out the best of our values, and to truly be a place where all are welcome at the family table. In addition to the country fried Christians, I hope to interview what I call kudzu Christians. If you've ever driven through the South, you have seen kudzu, this beautiful green plant that grows everywhere, up and down country roads. It is hard to see a tree that hasn't got a little bit of this leafy greenness on it. Not only are trees covered with its winding vines, but it's been known to cover fences, walls, roadsides, and street lamps. And it has become a fixture of the southern landscape, so much so that many tend to think it is a plant original to the southeast of the United States. But in fact, the kudzu's origins go back to Asia. It came to the United States through trade. But after being transplanted on southern soil, it became such a prominent and beautiful addition to our fields and hills that we adopted this kudzu plant as our own. And our kudzu interviews highlight individuals who, just like the kudzu plant, have been transplanted into the South from elsewhere, but who have become a fixture in our southern landscape and southern life. And though these individuals were not born here, they have come to call the South their home. And by the way they bring new progressive ideas and perspectives into our Southland, they are adding to the beauty of our community, just like the kudzu plant beautifies our landscape. Today I will be sharing an interview with Reverend Hugh Hollowell, a Mennonite pastor who is the director of Love Wins. Love Wins is a ministry in Raleigh, North Carolina, which focuses on building intentional community as a way of lifting up those caught in the cycle of poverty and homelessness. Hugh's ministry made headlines a short time ago for what North Carolinians called Biscuitgate, which was an attempt by the Raleigh, North Carolina City Police to threaten those involved with Love Wins' regular program of feeding people in need Bojangles biscuits on Saturdays in downtown Raleigh. Reverend Hollowell successfully fought the attempt to stop this feeding program and continues this ministry. Reverend Hollowell and those at Love Wins regularly talk about the problem of homelessness in our community as being a problem growing out of the ways in which we dehumanize those dealing with poverty. The Love Wins website, lovewinsministries.org, summarizes the focus of their ministry by saying the solution to homelessness is not food, it's community, and by saying we are tired all the time. Since this interview in the fall of 2014, the Love Wins Hospitality House has moved from its previous Jones Street location to the campus of Trinity United Methodist Church at 824 North Bloodworth Street, Raleigh.
I had first heard about your ministry through my friend David Anderson, who works over at Fulham Baptist. He had let me know about what was going on back during the whole Biscuit Gate fiasco. And
Right.
and I thought, I'm really been impressed with what you do, and I thought some of the folks who read my blog would be interested to hear about you and about your ministry.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm happy to talk. I think that'll be great.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about how you felt your call to the ministry you're doing?
Well, I grew up in rural Mississippi and spent my 20s in financial sales, and I was a stockbroker, basically. Then in my late 20s began to feel like that was not who I am. That was not sustainable. I grew up Methodist, but I began to read some of the writings of early Anabaptist writers and realized that the gospel message they were proposing was somewhat different than the way I had understood it in my own life. And so the Anabaptist tradition, the Mennonite tradition, presupposes this, that Jesus doesn't just love us, but Jesus wants us to do something. And so anyway, started reading these books and was convicted that I needed to make some changes, that I didn't want my legacy to be that I was going to help rich old people hide their money from the government. And as a result of that, ended up quitting, spent the next couple of years running a bookstore and volunteering with various organizations that work with poverty and homelessness. Because of my sales background, I have been taught the importance of relationships and networking and connecting with people. And as I was volunteering in different places and seeing how poverty plays out, it was obvious to me that the reason people were in the position they were in was often because of the relationships they either had or did not have. And so it became self-evident to me that homelessness is about, first and foremost, homelessness is about relationships. If you think of all of the reasons that you're not worried about being homeless tonight, it comes down to who you can call, right? And if you have no one to call, well, that puts you in a different position than if you have 20 people to call. And so what stands between us and homelessness is our relationship. So I proposed to some of the groups I was working with that we should treat homelessness as a relationship issue, and they weren't, like we're a food pantry or we're a shelter, or like they had their niche. And weren't really interested. So I closed the bookstore and I moved to Raleigh. I was in Memphis at the time.
So that's a big shift there from Memphis to Raleigh.
Yeah, it is. But I wanted to work. I love the South, so I wanted to be in the South, and I also wanted to be near the ocean because I love the ocean. And Raleigh's about 2 hours away, 90 minutes if you drive fast. And it's beautiful here, but also has a pretty severe problem with homelessness on a per capita basis. Yeah. And so it just seemed like a really good place to try to put my ideas in action. So moved here and started treating, saying what would it look like if we founded an organization that treated homelessness as a relationship issue instead of as an economic issue or a political issue or a addiction issue or whatever. So that's how we got started. Spent time in the park, meeting with people, talking to people, when they invited me to, praying with people, just in essence acting like a pastor.
Yeah.
To people who were experiencing homelessness. Out of that grew, then the question became, how do we build those relationships with people? And we needed an excuse, if you will, to start those conversations. And so we started sharing food on the weekends because in the South, food is love. And what better way to start a conversation than while sharing a cup of coffee? And out of that grew our worshiping community that meets on Sundays now. And the worshiping community grew many more relationship opportunities. I've performed many weddings, funerals, baby christenings, the whole thing. I am, in effect, pastor to a community made up mostly of people who are homeless. And almost 3 years ago, a local church gave us the use of a building that we then turned into a hospitality house where we're open from 9 to 5 during the week.
Yeah.
And we're extending hospitality. So there's an endless pot of coffee going. There's always peanut butter and jelly, and you can make yourself a sandwich. There's a washer and a dryer. There's a bathroom. There's air conditioning and heat. It's a place that you can just go and be present, because when you're experiencing homelessness, there's not a lot of places it's acceptable for you to just go and be,
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting you're saying, you said this at the Wild Goose, that you trying to move it away from homelessness as an issue to these are people, and this
Right.
is relationships. And everything you're describing, growing up here in the South myself, that is what we do for people we have a relationship with. Mama put food out, and she says, you look famished. You know, people say, come up and put your feet up under my table, and that's what I hear you doing.
Absolutely. Ari Nolan has this great quote about hospitality that if you remind me, send an email to Amanda, I can get you the exact citation. But basically where he says that it's not about getting someone to change sides. It's about creating space for people where they can change. Right? It's not about me getting you to change. It's about creating space so that you have the freedom to change. And so it's exactly about hospitality. It's exactly about being a welcoming presence to someone, and and quite frankly, demonstrating the very real presence of Jesus to them. So that's what we do. Been doing it we're in our 8th year now, and we're up to a staff of 5 people, and we have more than 100 people a day come to our hospitality house. We have a couple of dozen folks that come to our worshiping community on Sunday, and we're working on building a community.
Beautiful.
Because as we're fond of saying, I probably said this at the festival, the opposite of homelessness isn't housing. The opposite of homelessness is community.
That was one of the things you said that it really struck a chord with me. I know I used to pastor a church in Fayetteville that was supposed to be very liberal and open-minded, and all these things where you'd think they would love to reach out to the community who's homeless, and they were right in the smack dab in the middle of downtown Fayetteville. And our neighbors were people and homeless people. And I started saying, hey, community, why don't we get to know our neighbors? And I was shocked that a lot of people got frightened about treating our neighbors who were homeless as people. But, I wasn't able to make that work in that church with that community. But what I hear you doing is that, saying these are our neighbors, these aren't the issue, these are people.
Absolutely. I mean, if we believe the Bible, in Genesis it tells us that Adam and his descendants were made in the very image of God, and that's not just middle class people are made in the image of God, and it's not just people who shop at the same places we shop are made in the image of God. That is, all humans are made in the image of God, and so that means that my friend Willie, who is an alcoholic and sleeps under the bridge, is made in the image of God in the same way that Mr. Jenkins, who runs the bank, yeah. If, as Jesus says, how much we love God is demonstrated by how much we care for those who are on the bottom of society, then that I think should have implications on our actions, right? But until we can love our neighbor, we have to get to know our neighbor, because a lot of us don't love our neighbor. We just love the idea of our neighbor, which is why it's much easier to raise money to go on a mission trip to Africa to love on some poor people over there for 2 weeks than it is to raise $1,000 to take care of a homeless pregnant woman who lives in your neighborhood. Because when you're done with the Africans, you can come back here and they're not going to call you again. Yeah. You get to go over there and you have your wonderful little Jesus experience, and then you get to come back here and resume your life, and you don't have to be impacted by that. Whereas if you get to know my friend Curtis, Curtis is going to call you every day, and Curtis is he's going to believe you when you say that you want to get to know him, and so he's going to call you when it's really bad, and then you have to do something about that. And so it's much easier to just go to Africa or Haiti or wherever and then be able to turn that off when you get back. So, but yeah, no, absolutely. It's a consistent problem in the church that we end up dealing with an awful lot, that we love the idea of our poor people, but we don't actually want to have to be involved with any poor people, or at least locally.
Well, it sounds like trying to keep people at arm's length is one issue that you've had been brought up through your work that you want other people of faith here in the South to hear about. Are there any other issues or things you've learned that you want people to be able to hear about?
Well, so we actually talk a great deal. It's tongue-in-cheek, but we talk about the concept of hobophobia, H-O-B-O, phobia, and it's a very real thing. It's fear of people who are in poverty. The ways in which we slander people who are in poverty, the ways in which we we talk poorly about them, the ways in which we assume that we assume judgment over people who are in poverty. If you ever want an interesting social experiment, just go onto Facebook and enter this following as your status. I came out of a restaurant and a man with a sign asked me for $1. Like, nothing more than that. Just leave that as your Facebook status and see what happens. You'll get an incredible number of people who will talk about he's a bum, they will talk about he's worthless, that will talk good Christian folk who go to church with you. We'll talk about how if this is America or if he would just work hard. They don't know anything about the man, but because he's poor, they immediately start making assumptions about him. And so that is what we mean when we talk about homophobia. Good Christian people who would never, ever, ever in polite company use the M word have no problem calling someone a bum or a wino. Realizing that how we talk about people, how we interact with them, our preconceived notions, those are all stereotypes. I think that all of those problems could be solved if we would only get to know people and actually interact with them instead of our preconceived ideas.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful lesson. I know I went to an event at Chapel Hill over where I live, and they gave the example of how people respond when they're in line at the grocery store and they see somebody with food stamps.
Absolutely.
And it's an example, again, of that homophobia.
Right, exactly.
Well, one place I kind of, in my mind, I see this connected, and I know, Wild Goose, you said in your ministry you don't so much try to get into all the political debates, but when I was exposed to your ministry was in the situation surrounding what I heard called Biscuitgate. And a lot of people talked about how in our culture there's sort of a war on the poor,
Right.
And to me, I see the way in which there's so much, I'd say, insensitivity toward people who are poor, not just in individual families, but even on a whole statewide level, and not just here. Talking to somebody the other day in Virginia who said in some towns there it's almost illegal to be homeless. But I wonder if you have any thoughts either about Biscuitgate or this war on the poor people talked about and how that connects with the homophobia you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have two perspectives on that. One is that I think that we in the church, because at the end of the day I'm a Christian pastor, right? Yeah. And so if I'm speaking to a Christian audience, I would say that we in the church have an obligation to love those who are on the bottom of society. And we have an obligation to care for what Jesus called the least of these. And that obligation is not dependent upon the cooperation of the state. Jesus didn't say, if Mr. Caesar lets you, feed the hungry. Yeah. He said to his disciples, go give them something to eat. He didn't. If Mr. Obama says it's okay, then you can, take care of the sick. He said, heal the sick. So we as Christians have obligations that are completely independent of what the state does. All the state can do is make it easier for us to do those things. So when I was almost arrested for sharing food, it was never in doubt that I was going to share food. Yeah. The question came, was the state going to make it easy for me to share food or to not? Yeah. And so because of that, I think that a lot of times we Christians, especially those of us on the more progressive end of the Christian spectrum, want to confuse the kingdom of God with politics. And we desire a world where all will be fed, and so we vote for this candidate. And so my question is always, well, what if I'm a Christian in China? Or what if I'm a Christian in Uganda? Or what if I'm a Christian that isn't in North America? Because if the only way I can bring about the kingdom of God is by voting for the right candidate, then I'm confusing the kingdom of God with the kingdom of America. Because whether I'm a Christian in China or I'm a Christian in the United States, I have the same obligation to take care of least of these. All the government does is make it easier or harder. So if I were speaking to a Christian audience, I would make that point. But to the larger, because this was actually an issue that affected not only Christians, but also Muslims who bring food out. There was a secular humanist group who brought food out. It was an all-out, not just a war on our Christian responsibility, but it was a war on the effort of humanitarians, of people of goodwill who wanted to extend compassion to people who were experiencing poverty. And so then it becomes more than just my Christian responsibility. At that point, it's like, what does it mean to be a human, right? And as a human who lives in the city of Raleigh, I want to live in a city that is a compassionate city. and I want to live in a city that makes it easy for people to be compassionate. That was the area at which I spoke to the city. As I said, the people of Raleigh want to believe that they are compassionate people.
Mm-hmm.
They believe they are compassionate people. The city of Raleigh has won multiple awards as like the most hospitable city, but apparently what we're seeing is that that is only true if you are middle class, or that is only true if you have money to invest in the city. And so the question that the city of Raleigh has to answer is, are we as concerned about the rights of the poor citizens of Raleigh as we are the rights of the middle class and wealthy citizens of Raleigh? And so what we did is we held up a mirror to the city of Raleigh, and we said that this is what you look like right now. To the world outside, you look like you're stingy, and you're not compassionate, and you don't care about people who are poor. And I don't believe that about you. So this is an opportunity for you to change things. And they did. It worked out well, and lots of good things happened, and now the city actually has provided us a facility right across the street from where they were going to arrest us for the distribution of food. So anyway, so yeah, but first and foremost, I approach this as a Christian, and I have obligations whether the state facilitates those or not.
I love that image you had of holding up the mirror and saying, is this who you want to be? Because I think that's a beautiful picture of what Christian witness is when it's done right in those circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I like to also talk about, and I think you might have some thoughts about it, in my blog I talk about the connection between Southern culture and faith, and I talk a little bit about kind of the tension between what I call the remnants of slaveholder Christianity, those approaches to the faith that kind of use the faith to justify discrimination or mistreatment of people, and then the legacy of the civil rights movement, which is a huge part of our Southern Christian tradition. And I wonder if there's any ways you've seen that tension lived out in your ministry or your time as a Christian in the South.
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of our the slaveholder mentality actually extends forward into how we approach missions, especially missions to poor black people, because we're almost always framing the work that we're doing, we the Christian church. So when we do ministry to the poor, well, in the first place, it's something that we're doing to them.
Mm-hmm.
And second is we often couch it in terms of things like we have an obligation to do this, right? Like we who have been blessed have an obligation to do that, which is the definition of noblesse oblige. My great-grandfather thought, that it was his job to take care of the blacks who worked on his property, right? And they were his black, if he talked about it. And so, I have had churches tell me that when we've tried to work with a given population, that these are their poor people. So it's like this paternalistic ownership. We all kind of approach. I'm sorry.
No, I was starting to say that it's almost the white man's burden continues.
Exactly. And because in the South, poverty and being a person of color are nearly synonymous. They're not exclusive, but they are, especially in urban areas, they are almost one and the same. You have all these delightful overtones of class and race on top of poverty. So inevitably you end up with a bunch of white people who come out and give black people things black people didn't ask for and tell black people what they ought to do to fix their life, which isn't always appreciated, as you might can imagine. The other thing is that when we talk about that we have a ministry to the poor, if you put to the poor in quotes, like I said at the festival, if we replace poor with any other word, that becomes extremely offensive. We have a ministry to the black. We have a ministry to the blondes, to the redheads, to Republicans, to like whatever. And so anyway, so we do that, which is again a form of paternalism, because we're saying that we assume we know what is best for you. Yes, poor black person, if you will do what I tell you to do, everything will be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Is what in essence we're saying.
I had interviewed somebody a couple weeks ago who was talking about disability issues, and they said that the flip side of that for them has been when the great advice and great help wasn't what was needed, people become resentful to them for not being, thank you so much.
Right. Well, there's this great story in The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky when there's a rich woman, who comes to the priest, and she tells the priest that she had dreamed the night before, and in the dream she was supposed to work with the poor, and God in the dream was telling her she should work with the poor, and she should go and bring food to the poor, and she should love the poor. And the priest said to her that that's a wonderful thing. And she said, yes, but Father, when I woke up, I realized that I don't think I can do that, because what if the poor aren't happy to see me? What if the poor aren't grateful? What if the poor are mean? What if they don't appreciate the work that I do for them? And the priest said that love in practice is a harsh and dreadful thing compared to love in dreams.
Wow.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. It's a harsh and dreadful thing compared to love in dreams. That, because often what we want is we don't want to, air quote, help the poor. We want to get credit for helping the poor. So, yeah, so that's where we're at. But I'm very clear that I do this work in the South, and I do it as a white man in the South.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's a reason that I didn't have to worry about. There's a reason, that despite growing up poor in the South, I was still relatively comfortable. And it has a lot to do with the fact that nobody had my granddaddy in chains, and nobody ever stole our land. And so yeah, I mean, John Scalzi, who's a science fiction writer, on his blog has a wonderful metaphor about that being white and male in America is like playing the video game on the easiest setting. It's like, he said it doesn't guarantee you win, but it makes life so much easier than if you're playing on the high setting,
Yeah.
I found that just a really helpful metaphor, especially for those of us who happen to benefit from being white and male and live in the South.
Yeah.
It's not guaranteed we'll win, but it's a lot easier for us than it is for somebody else.
Yeah.
Well, I really do appreciate it, Micah. And if you get up here, please come by and say hi.
Well, I am so glad I found you. I was out here on my own, couldn't find a single place where I could feel at home. I was just amazed to see that you'd been here for so long. I'm grateful that you persevered. I wrote you all this song. I was thinking mango thoughts in a meatloaf town. The food for thought was all the same. It really brought me down. Nothing on the heavenly buffet line was satisfying my appetite for truth and right. I'm sitting here just sighing. Everybody else seemed fine with blue Jell-O, green peas, banana pudding, nothing spicy, no blintzes, no Vietnamese. I was craving jalapeno talk just to soothe my soul. Saying unsurprising things was taking all my self-control. I'm glad the talk is straight here. Though a lot of the people are not. We got patriots and protesters, and that ain't all. We got atheists and redneck Hindus. We got pagan Buddhist Jews. Some of us like the Christian songs, some just believe the blues. Spirit and a feast for the mind. We speak the truth, walk in love, we remember to be kind. Well, that's what the ending would be if I were a sweet and earnest person. And Lord knows I do try. But here's the real ending. We got us a feast for the Spirit and a feast for the mind. But in case of rapture, pack a snack, 'cause we'll be left behind.